Hello and welcome to another spoiler episode of Umineko. This video is going to contain full spoilers for the entirety of the game. Everything's going to come up. Do not watch this if you've not played the whole thing. You won't even understand what I'm talking about. And this video is going to cover parts 2 and 3 of episode 2 of my Let's Play. In this section, we're get a lot more of the interior life of the servants, and Beatrice as a kind of reflection of that. One thing that's important in this section about both Shannon and Kanon, but also even Beatrice, is their relationship to the concept of being furniture, and how they've internalized it, what it means, and how it influences their behavior. Because at least initially, both Shannon and Kanon accept that they are furniture, and that means that they cannot live full human lives. Early on, Shannon says that being furniture means that she cannot experience certain emotions, and those are just beyond her. But not in the sense of furniture is incapable of feeling those emotions, but that furniture is not allowed to experience these emotions. She refers to it as being like a drug. And obviously people can take drugs, but the implication is that it's illicit and forbidden, and you should not engage in it. And of course, Kanon is a lot more faithful to this idea. He also believes that they are furniture, that it's foolish to try and aim to be more than furniture, and that any attempt to do so will only bring them pain and will upend the order that they should just be accepting of. Kanon in some ways is very cynical, but very accepting. He will shit-talk other servants and the Higurashi family members, because he's fairly cynical and blunt about them being bad people. In a way that Shannon doesn't feel allowed to. Shannon feels like she has to be nice and take things on and just respond in that way. Kanon is willing to call other people out on shit. But that's in part because Kanon has a general attitude of things are the way they are. We must accept them and not try to fight them. Part of how he complains is by asserting the character of people. He talks about how there's a section in here where he'll talk about the way in which a fellow servant basically does less work by only cleaning the parts that she knows Natsuhi will check, because the servant in question can get away with doing this and can then do less work and not have to work as hard but still look good. And Kanon's very critical of her for this. But given how Natsuhi treats Shannon, who's trying to do an honest good job, why would you bother doing an honest good job? Why would it matter? In one sense, Kanon could accept that, but he's very quick to blame other people and doubt them and be suspicious of them. And we can see this too with Beatrice. Kanon doesn't believe that Beatrice has good motives. And we'll get to a little bit more specifics with that later, but the conversations they have, both Shannon and Kanon, the conversations they have with Beatrice reflect their own feelings about her. And that's going to be interesting when we get to those. Kanon, in fact, says that his soul was polluted long ago, which to me definitely reads as a reference to the fact that Kanon as a role, as a person, was born of this kind of cynical acceptance of things. Kanon was born from the notion that things aren't going to get better. Things are going to be like this, and people are going to keep shitting on them and just thrusting responsibilities upon them and blaming them for things that they have no right to blame them for. To talk a little bit more about Beatrice when she appears to Shannon, there's some funny lines in here that show the ways in which Beatrice is modelled on the Higurashis as rich people. Beatrice, in one sense, is a vision of what a person... Beatrice, in one sense, is a vision of what Kinzo's grandchild could be. In theory, at the very least, if not in actuality. The existence of Beatrice being so doubted means that it's unlikely Beatrice could self-actualize and be accepted by the Ashurmia family. But in theory, if she was, there's a somewhat tragic assumption that she would be just as bad as the other Ashurmias. In fact, there's one line where she was gracious to those who respected her, but would surely curse those who made light of her. This is something we've literally just seen Natsuhi do to Shannon, where Shannon talking back meant that Natsuhi would retaliate. And then there's other points where Beatrice will specifically repeat lines that say Ava has said, where Ava says that Shannon should know her place, and that furniture couldn't expect any more, couldn't expect to be a partner of George. Beatrice repeats these things verbatim. In fact, some of her more sharp lines are quoting from Ava, and that's because Beatrice is a representation of doubts that they have. Beatrice in some ways shows what they could expect the Ashurmias to be like. Because Beatrice is simultaneously them imagining a role in which they would have power and privilege and an ability to do things that furniture cannot. Someone with... and then thinking about the other people they know with that power and privilege and how they grow up and what they turn out to do. Beatrice also here explains the truth of the single element. One thing that's very just a funny little thing to me is she talks about the ways in which people tried to explain the world in only 4 elements. And then they upped it to 5 elements, or 6 elements, 7 elements, and they kept just changing how many elements the world was made of in a way that tried to make the world make more sense when it wasn't working. This is both funny given just how many elements are currently in the periodic table, but also to me reads as a little in-joke for later how Battler is going to assert that there are more people on the island than actually do exist, and then Beatrice will have to reduce that number with the red truth. And this is also a weird section because Beatrice talks about how a single man appeared by the guidance of a star. Beatrice starts talking about Jesus. How Jesus came and told people that the truth of the world is that love is the single element. It's an unusual way for Beatrice to frame her explanation of magic, but it does make sense because it is one of many references that hint to the idea that Beatrice is Western in origin, which is of course true of the original Beatrice, which reverberates through the future Beatrices. And of course, the reason why love is a single element is because of the way Beatrice's magic functions. Magic is about accepting narratives of situations and believing in things and not being cynical or doubtful about them. Which very neatly dovetails into the section where, after Beatrice has first spoken, Shannon briefly wonders if she should ask Beatrice's name, and then, realizing that that is ridiculous, it is clear she knows who Beatrice is. And this will come up later with other people seeing Beatrice and saying it is clear who it is. Beatrice, in this episode, is making a point of showing people how a person can be identified. Because, realistically, Beatrice shares a body with Shannon and Kanon, there is obviously, if you do not have love, you can claim that those aren't different people. But if you actually do have love and you understand, you can see that by changing costume, by changing outfit and demeanor, they become different people. And once you have done that, people accept it very quickly, especially when they don't realize that they're of different bodies. In this situation, Shannon just already understands. She realizes this is a person who is not me, who is distinct from me, and it is clear who she is based on a very brief interaction. Likewise, later, Kyrie is going to just see her in passing in the hallway, and she's just going to go, oh, that's Beatrice. Like, seeing her next to the portrait, seeing her demeanor, how she looks and everything, it's clear that's her. I'll get into that more when we actually get to that scene in the spoiler talks. And in fact, Shannon in this scene even says that it would be disrespectful to ask her name. Partly because she's implicating that Beatrice is such a respected person you should just know, but in part that's because by asking her name you're almost doing a mini denial of asserting that she needs to validate her identity because it is not self-evident, even though it is self-evident. And we didn't talk about it last time really, but the fact that Shannon destroys the mirror in the shrine, in other words, the fact that Shannon puts dynamite or explosives, I don't remember if it's actually literally dynamite, in the shrine for Beatrice to test it out and make sure the explosives are still good. It feels like a very significant way to have introduced Beatrice having a tiny sliver of power. There's something great about the fact that quite a mundane and practical thing necessary for Beatrice to begin the ceremony is that she needs to know that the explosives will work. She needs to know that the island can in fact be blown up. And to do this, the best way to test it is on a small remote island that's still nearby and that no one will notice, and that no one will really notice being gone technically, and that will also be not really symbolic so much as it will be narratively appropriate. There is a thread that she can and does weave about why this is important. When she talks about the power of the mirror itself opposing her own, you can slot this in with similar discussions before about wavelengths, and in a sense, I'm reading this as someone does physically need to act to put the dynamite in place for this test to work. And Beatrice is still somewhat insubstantial in the sense that without knowing that the explosives can work, there is no future for a person like Beatrice, because the Ashuramiya families will clearly deny her. There's no reasonable pathway forward where you could imagine Beatrice being a person who gets to exist. However, if the explosives do work, then that's the beginning of a step where Beatrice can begin to accumulate power. And with that accumulated power, she could perhaps set some things in motion that could lead to Beatrice actually getting to live as Beatrice. Or, if not live, act. Or, if not live, act in one spectacular weekend. And Shannon's response to Beatrice in this scene is very interesting, because Shannon says nothing bad has happened until now. We have lived in peace. And Shannon, that's just not true. You could make the argument that you are content with how things are going, but in the past 2 hours of this episode, of only this episode, 2 different women have been extremely rude to you and have gutted your chances for happiness. And these are not unusual occurrences. This is just de facto what Shannon's life is, and Shannon is only one of many people here. Beatrice's extremely understated reaction of, it's just as you say, the same unbreakable days that have passed until now will continue till tomorrow and the next day. Beatrice does not agree that nothing bad has happened. Beatrice just agrees that the status quo will be maintained if nothing is done. But Beatrice does not think the status quo is peaceful or that it's good. And neither does Shannon truly, because Shannon breaks the mirror. Shannon asserts that the status quo is fine because it is more comfortable to maintain those cycles without changing anything. But she ultimately knows that if she wants to be happy, something does need to change. And once Beatrice knows she can use the explosives, lots of things start changing. And one bit near the end that I think is an interesting reflection of the ways that Beatrice is composited from the Ashurmiya families is that Beatrice says she knows who George's marriage meeting will be with. However, she's not claiming she knows the identity of the person that George will be meeting with. She knows the type of person that George will have a marriage meeting with and starts listing off qualities that are allegedly not Shannon's qualities, and instead the qualities of a high-class woman, a woman who has not lived and worked as a servant for many years. These, though they are not said on screen, are the words of one of the Ashurmiya family members. You can bet that. Presumably Ava. Maybe George, maybe Jessica, but much more likely Ava as an intentional dig at Shannon to try and drive a wedge between them. And as I was referencing earlier, here's the part where Beatrice goes on a huge tirade against Shannon, and you can pick out multiple lines that are picked directly from Ava's mouth. Have you forgotten to be grateful for your education? Truly top tier, really shitty line from an employer, and so much in this context. And in this scene, it is interesting how Beatrice's physicality is asserted. A bruise is made on Shannon and Kanon's hands, curiously, in the same spot. It's almost like their body is one and the same. And Beatrice does this so that they can't pretend that the witch was never there. And so this is a thing that will come up later with magic, but it is easy to dismiss magic when there are no results of it remaining. Often, Beatrice will use magic to explain how, in a sealed location, one state was transformed into another state. 2 people were alive in this room hours ago, 2 people are now dead in this room, with stakes in them. But obviously anything could have happened in the intervening moments that led to that result, but magic is one way of constructing the explanation for what happened there. And so, if there was no bruise, come the morning, Shannon and Kanon could just claim there was never any witch, none of that happened, we can stop thinking about it and move on. Instead, a bruise lasting a few days on your hand is a clear physical lingering manifestation of the witch. But given the nature of the witch, what this also means is that the body did this to itself. The physicality of this is complicated and not that important, honestly, but the thing that I think is interesting in a certain respect is that this means Beatrice did indeed have some degree of control of the body. So even before Shannon has smashed the mirror, Beatrice holds a degree of sway. Beatrice is not utterly powerless. Beatrice has enough to affect the physical world, even if she might need someone else to put the dynamite in place to test it, to begin the revival of her magic. And of course, not just that, but the bruise is a lingering reminder of a course of action Shannon could take and could consider, and as we know, ends up taking. And even just jumping to the next time Beatrice returns, her physicality is underscored a little bit in that she doesn't always have physicality. It is interesting that Shannon specifically calls out that Beatrice sits on like an arch, which I assume is an arch, like a kind of wooden trellis thing for some plants to grow through. Beatrice can happily sit on this because she's a witch, which in this sense means that in this moment she does not have a physical presence. She has a purely magical presence. Later in this episode, specifically the family conference, she will have a physical presence, and that will be important and relevant. But in this situation, is not there. And then in this conversation, the witch calls attention to the fact that Shannon's relationship with George would normally be impossible, and yet the power of the witch could overcome that. What power is the witch bestowing in this case? She has given the butterfly brooch, which is clearly symbolic of her power, but what materially does Beatrice change? Is it a purely narrative change? Is this a case where Shannon would not have the confidence and belief to make this happen? We'll see basically that having the confidence of being with George has made her perform her job better. So it's not unreasonable to think that, in a certain sense, Beatrice giving her confidence and making her believe this possibility existed at all is itself the magic. Shannon, in her normal state, would presume that this is simply impossible. But given the push from Beatrice, it emboldens her to believe that there is a chance, and then she will take and nurture the chance that does exist, even if technically it existed all the time. We know George is interested, and George's interest does not seem to be only in response to Shannon's actions, so it's reasonable to think he would have pursued her regardless, but that the difference of Beatrice's magic is that Shannon doesn't feel like it's futile. As furniture, lots of things are off limits to Shannon, one of which would be love. And so, without Beatrice's magic, would Shannon simply have Kanon's reaction of refusing George's advances and just feeling they are beyond her? And yet again, in this scene when Beatrice is being mean to Shannon, this is paralleling George, who was also being mean and bullying Shannon for fun in the previous episode, in the previous video, in an affectionate way. Beatrice apologizes and says, "I'm not being mean to you because I'm not trying to be mean to you. I just think it's fun and it's part of my personality." That is basically what George is doing too, but Kanon finds this more distasteful. And now here's where Beatrice really rounds out the idea of love being a single element, and that with love things can be seen, where she says that Shannon is lucky that her love is not one-sided. Her love is reciprocal because George also loves her and accepts her, and though George may not understand the underlying truth of Shannon and who she is, he accepts her as she is, believes she's a person, and that is enough to make a world. That is the single element in which her world could be founded, and she has it. And it's a little sad that the implication here is that Beatrice does not believe Battler would reciprocate. And, well, she's right currently at the very least. Though there is still some cynicism in Beatrice here to me, where she says all that's needed is two people, and that perhaps you could call this an ideal world. But even though there are two people who are ready and willing to share in this world, there is at least one person who wants to tear them apart. And the question is, do you need to have only two people and no interference for this ideal world to exist? I really love Beatrice's positive qualities in this scene, or I love the way in which she's childish. She gets to clearly be not quite some terrifying old... Despite constantly being referred to as the 1,000-year-old witch, she's not a terrifying presence. She's not really that scary to Shannon. They're genuinely friends in this scene. with the whole candy eating stuff, and even Shannon thanking Beatrice and Beatrice being appreciative of being thanked parallels both the fact that servants do a thankless job regularly and get blame but not really praise, but also that, specifically around Beatrice's magic, Kinzo has probably not been a very appreciative receiver of magic. When it comes to talking about Kinzo's lack of magical energy, Beatrice gets very sad. And this is a complicated thing for me to parse. I'm unclear as to what relationship Beatrice wanted from Kinzo. At a best guess, my assumption is that Beatrice wanted Kinzo to see and accept her, but accept her for who she truly is, and not accept her as a reincarnation of the wife that he lost. There's not a lot to go on here, and I know that later we will get a more direct explanation of Beatrice II and her life and how that is being reflected in current Beatrice. But right now, there's a strange kind of loss with Kinzo, where Beatrice seems to want affection from him, but in a way that she knows he cannot give, and he does not see her because he does not have love, at least not the correct love. And debatably, even for his original wife, and debatably, even for original Beatrice, he might have more obsession and infatuation than anything to do with love. Because truly, he wants his desires to be fulfilled more than he is trying to bring his beloved wife back. He does not feel that she is missing out or unfortunate in death. He merely wants to see her again. Beatrice does talk about how Kinzo sought out the single element. Kinzo sought out love, but never found it. Which, to me, feels like it underscores his inability to truly love Beatrice and who Beatrice is now. And one thing actually it gets repeated here, and I think this is a more clear demonstration of it, the metaphor of Beatrice's magic being blocked, I am reading as her assertion that the Ashuramias have to be gone for her or Kanon or Shannon to self-actualize. Or perhaps a different person. She talks about how the table has been set wrong for her power. She cannot self-actualize in the current set of conditions. To fix things, the table will need to be cleared. The board needs to be emptied. There must not be any traces of the current status quo. It must be clearly removed so that then the table can be set once more in a way that is palatable and suitable to Beatrice's powers. When Kanon appears to deliver his rebuttal to Beatrice and his general rejection of Beatrice, he says that even if they receive names and are treated as humans, it won't change the manner of our birth. Now there's some phrasing. Their birth is not the birth of a human body. Their birth is the beginning of them as people from the one body. Kanon's cynical, realist in quotation marks, view here is that they will never be able to be people because they are just furniture born of this person. Spread across the whole section with Kanon and Jessica's date is an interesting example of how the Ashura members could escape their defined roles and their fates. Potentially, at least. Jessica can live as Jessie-sama when she's in school. She can be this different person who is not under the weight of being the successor to the family head. She can play music and pursue the career that she actually cares about. Or a hobby, maybe, depending on where she goes with it. Kanon asks if this is her true self, her actual identity. And he finds it odd that he hasn't seen this before. But of course he hasn't, because he can't see it on Rokkenkjima. Just like Shannon and Kanon are trapped in that setting, they cannot be other people while they're there. They don't really get to go and do a lot of stuff elsewhere unless they're on dates like this. For Shannon and Kanon, this is one way in which they need someone to take them away and accept them for them to truly become people. In a way that Jessica, Battler, or George can just go if they wanted. Battler did leave for 6 years. He just went and lived with a different part of his family. He has that power. He has family who can enable him to do this. And it's tragic that Kanon has half a realization on this front, where he realizes that Rokkenkjima is not the whole world, even if it's all of the world he gets to experience. But he still does not accept the love that he has, and without it, he still cannot see. Expect that lack of ability to see to develop over the course of this episode. But that's all for this spoiler talk, so I'll see you with a new one probably in 2 weeks again. Until then, thank you for watching, and also, I never mentioned this, but there's some very good comments get posted on these videos. I recommend checking them out, seeing some of the discussion that happens there. There's some good discussion that happens there, and we post follow-up talks and chats, so it's worth looking. But that's all for this week. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.